The morning of my sister's wedding began exactly the way I had imagined it would. Calm, bright, almost unreal in how perfect everything felt. Sunlight slipped through the hotel curtains in soft gold lines, landing across the dress hanging near the window. For a moment I just stood there watching it sway gently, letting myself breathe. Months of planning had finally led to this day. My feet ached from running on almost no sleep. My phone battery had barely survived the night, and my head was still full of timelines, vendor confirmations, and last-minute details. But underneath the exhaustion was pride. My little sister was getting married, and somehow we had made it happen. I checked my reflection one more time, smoothing down my hair, reminding myself to relax. Today wasn't about logistics anymore. Today was supposed to be about family, celebration, and finally letting go of responsibility. For the first time in months, I told myself I could just be a guest. Just a sister. Outside my room, the hallway buzzed quietly with early activity. Garment bags rolled past. Someone laughed nervously. The faint scent of flowers drifted through the air as staff moved between suites preparing for the ceremony downstairs. Everything felt organized, controlled, exactly as planned. I stepped out to grab coffee and nearly turned back when I heard voices around the corner. The wedding planner stood near a table stacked with folders, speaking in a low, hurried whisper to one of the venue coordinators. I wasn't trying to listen, but my name caught my attention before I could walk away. "We just need her authorization before the ceremony," the planner said. "Once she approves the payment, we're good to go." I paused, confused. Authorization? Payment? I thought everything had already been handled weeks ago. My stomach tightened as the coordinator nodded and flipped through paperwork labeled with my sister's wedding details. They weren't looking for the bride. They were waiting for me. And in that quiet hallway, surrounded by flowers and celebration, something shifted in a way I couldn't yet explain. That was the moment I realized I wasn't the sister. I was the wallet. People like to believe betrayal begins with one big moment, one obvious decision, one cruel choice. But the truth is, betrayal usually grows quietly inside love, long before anyone notices it changing shape. And for me, it started years before the wedding, on a day that permanently divided our lives into before and after. The day our father died. Everything about that afternoon felt unreal. Hospital lights too bright, voices too careful, relatives speaking in soft tones that didn't match the weight pressing against my chest. My sister sat beside me, barely 20 at the time, gripping my hand so tightly her fingers trembled. She didn't cry at first. She just kept asking the same question over and over, as if repetition could change reality. I remember pulling her into my arms and hearing myself say words I hadn't planned. Words that came from instinct more than thought. "I've got you," I told her quietly. "I'll always take care of you." At the time, it didn't feel like a promise. It felt like responsibility naturally shifting into place. I was older, I was steadier, and she had always leaned on me even when life was easy. After Dad was gone, that dependence deepened in ways neither of us questioned. I helped her finish college applications when grief made her freeze. I answered late-night calls when anxiety kept her awake. I showed up for every crisis, every heartbreak, every moment she felt unsure of herself. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being just her sister. I became the person who fixed things. If rent was short, I figured it out. If her car broke down, I handled it. When she doubted herself, I reminded her who she was, until she believed it again. And every time she hugged me, thanking me with tears in her eyes, it felt meaningful. It felt like love working exactly the way family was supposed to work. I never kept score. I never thought about balance. Loving her didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like purpose. That's why the wedding mattered so much to me. It wasn't just a celebration of her future. It felt like proof that everything we had survived together had led somewhere beautiful. Watching her happy felt like watching our father's absence hurt a little less. Looking back now, I realized something I couldn't see then. When one person becomes the protector for long enough, the role slowly stops being temporary. It becomes expected, invisible, permanent, and somewhere between helping and holding everything together, love began changing into something else entirely. The question I didn't yet know to ask was simple. but terrifying once it formed. How did love turn into a transaction? Wedding planning didn't begin with grand decisions or champagne celebrations. It started quietly at my kitchen table with 2 laptops open, a notebook filled with ideas, and my sister sitting across from me scrolling through inspiration photos with the kind of excitement that made everything feel possible again. She wanted something simple at first. Just close family, soft colors, maybe a small outdoor ceremony. But like most dreams, it grew the more we talked about it. Venues turned into tours. Inspiration boards turned into contracts. And before either of us realized it, weekends disappeared into tastings, calls, and endless planning sessions that stretched late into the night. I became the organizer without anyone officially asking me to be. I compared vendor packages, negotiated prices, and tracked deadlines in spreadsheets color-coded so nothing would slip through the cracks. My evenings filled with emails instead of rest. My mornings started with payment reminders and confirmations. Every solved problem felt like progress towards something meaningful. When the first venue fell through 2 months in, she cried in my car, convinced the wedding was cursed. I remember squeezing her hand and telling her we would figure it out, then spending the next 48 hours calling locations until I secured an even better space. When catering costs unexpectedly increased, I quietly adjusted my own budget to cover the difference. I canceled a vacation I had been saving for all year without mentioning it to anyone. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like support. There was always another small crisis. A florist backed out. Bridesmaid dresses arrived in the wrong shade. The photographer requested an additional deposit earlier than expected. Each time, I stepped in before panic could fully reach her. Problems disappeared quickly enough that she started believing everything was simply working out. And every now and then she would stop, look at me with genuine warmth and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Those moments mattered more than she probably realized. She would hug me tightly after successful meetings or send late-night texts filled with heart emojis and gratitude. Once, after we finalized the venue decor, she rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You're making this my dream wedding." I smiled every time, brushing it off like it was nothing. Because to me, it wasn't about recognition. It was about seeing her happy, confident, excited about a future that finally felt stable after years of uncertainty. Friends and relatives often commented on how close we were. "You two are lucky to have each other," people would say, watching us move through decisions like a team that never argued. And they were right. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. By the final month, everything seemed perfectly aligned. Vendors confirmed. Invitations sent. Seating plans nearly finished. The wedding felt less like an event and more like a shared accomplishment, something we had built together piece by piece. If anyone had asked me then, I would have said our relationship had never been stronger. There were no warning signs I recognized, no obvious tension, no reason to doubt her intentions. Every thank you felt sincere, every smile felt real. And because I trusted her completely, the audience would too. That was the hidden foundation being built alongside the wedding itself, a belief so strong that when it finally cracked, it wouldn't just surprise me, it would hurt in a way neither of us had prepared for. The changes didn't arrive as arguments or confrontations. Nothing dramatic happened. In fact, if someone had asked me at the time, I probably would have said everything was going smoothly. The shift was quieter than that, almost polite, hidden inside small moments that felt easy to dismiss. It started with emails. For months, every vendor copied me on conversations. I handled timelines, confirmed details, and answered questions before anyone else even saw them. Then gradually, I noticed replies arriving later than usual. Decisions seemed to move forward without my input. One afternoon, while reviewing the catering schedule, I realized an updated menu had already been approved. My name wasn't included anywhere on the thread. I assumed it was a mistake. I forwarded the email to the planner, asking if she needed anything from me. She responded warmly, thanking me for all my help, but added that the bride wanted to handle final approvals personally now that the wedding was close. The message sounded reasonable enough. I told myself this was normal. Maybe my sister simply wanted to feel more involved. A week later, During a venue walkthrough, her future mother-in-law began answering questions directed at me. When the florist asked about table arrangements, she stepped forward smoothly, smiling as she explained the vision as if it had always been hers to present. I stood beside them, nodding along, unsure whether to interrupt or stay quiet. No one acknowledged the shift. The conversation just continued without me. The planner's tone changed next, subtle but noticeable. Where she once turned toward me first, she now addressed every question directly to my sister. I still attended meetings, but my role felt less defined. When I offered suggestions, responses came with gentle reassurances. "You've done so much already," the planner said once, placing a light hand on my arm. "You should relax and actually enjoy the wedding." Others repeated the same phrase. Relax, step back, let go. At first I appreciated it. After months of responsibility, the idea of resting sounded comforting. But the more often I heard it, the stranger it felt. Decisions I once managed moved forward without explanation. Updates arrived after plans were finalized. Conversations continued around me rather than with me. Nothing openly excluded me. No one said I wasn't needed. There were no harsh words, no visible conflict, just a gradual repositioning that left me slightly outside the center of something I had helped build. Each moment alone seemed harmless. Together they created a quiet distance I couldn't quite define. I kept telling myself it was natural. Weddings evolve. Roles change. Families merge. Still, a small question began forming in the back of my mind. One I wasn't ready to answer yet. Was this accidental or intentional? The first moment that truly felt strange happened during a routine vendor call I almost didn't answer. I was driving home from work when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number connected to the wedding venue. Assuming it was another scheduling confirmation, I picked up without thinking. The coordinator greeted me warmly. "Hi, I just wanted to confirm a few final details with you since you're listed as the event sponsor." I hesitated. "The sponsor?" "Yes." She continued casually, as if the term were obvious. "You're the financial contact on file for all remaining balances." Her tone carried no judgment, only efficiency, but the word lingered long after the call ended. Sponsor. Not sister. Not family representative. Something more transactional. I told myself it was simply administrative language. Nothing worth overthinking. Still, the phrasing stayed with me longer than it should have. A few days later, I stopped by the venue to drop off welcome bags. The ballroom was half assembled, tables marked with printed seating cards waiting to be arranged. Curious, I scanned the layout, smiling as I searched for my place near the head table. I found my name halfway across the room, at a guest table. For a moment, I assumed the chart was unfinished. Maybe placeholders hadn't been updated yet. I checked again, tracing the rows carefully. The bridal party sat together. Close family surrounded the couple. Even distant relatives held seats closer to the front. My name remained positioned among acquaintances and plus ones, separated from the center of the celebration entirely. Before I could process it fully, my sister's future mother-in-law approached, her smile polite but firm. She glanced at the chart and said lightly, "We thought this arrangement would be more comfortable for everyone. Less pressure on you. You've already done so much." Her words sounded kind yet final. Not a discussion, a decision already made. I nodded automatically, unsure how to respond without creating awkwardness. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had been too involved. Maybe stepping back was appropriate now that the wedding was almost here. But as I walked out of the ballroom, small moments began connecting in ways I couldn't ignore. The missed emails, the redirected conversations, the gentle encouragement to relax, the planner addressing only the bride, the new language people used when referring to me. Each detail alone meant little. Together, they formed a pattern slowly coming into focus. Something fundamental had shifted, and everyone else seemed to understand it before I did. I was still present, still included, but no longer central. And as the realization quietly settled in, one question surfaced that I wasn't ready to confront yet, though it refused to disappear. When did I stop being family? The hallway outside the bridal suite was louder now, filled with movement and nervous excitement. Makeup artists hurried past carrying cases. Bridesmaids laughed too loudly to hide their stress, and somewhere down the corridor, someone tisted music that echoed faintly through the walls. The wedding day had officially begun. I stood near the coffee station, trying to quiet the uneasy feeling that had followed me since seeing the seating chart. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Weddings were chaotic by nature. People made last-minute changes all the time. I told myself I just needed to stop analyzing and enjoy the day. That's when I heard the voices again. The planner and a venue coordinator stood a few steps away, speaking softly but urgently while reviewing a clipboard. "At least she handled the costs," the coordinator said. "Otherwise, this would have fallen apart weeks ago." The planner nodded. "Yeah, we just need final authorization today and everything's covered." I froze, coffee forgotten in my hands. They weren't speaking cruelly. Their tone was practical, almost appreciative. Still, something about the wording pressed sharply against my chest. Handled the costs, not helped, not supported. Handled. For a brief moment, panic tried to rise, but another thought pushed in just as quickly, offering relief I desperately wanted to believe. Maybe my sister didn't know. Maybe vendors naturally communicated this way behind the scenes. Maybe she assumed everything had already been settled months ago. She had trusted me to manage details from the beginning. It wouldn't be strange if she didn't realize how payments were structured or whose name remained attached to them. The idea softened something inside me. I imagined her upstairs, focused on getting ready, nervous about walking down the aisle, completely unaware of the financial conversations happening around her. The version of my sister I knew, the one who hugged me after planning meetings and thanked me with genuine tears, wouldn't intentionally push me aside. Hope returned quietly, wrapping around my thoughts like reassurance. Maybe this wasn't betrayal at all. Maybe it was just miscommunication layered over wedding stress. Maybe once the ceremony ended, we would laugh about how complicated everything had become. I held on to that possibility tightly, choosing understanding over suspicion, because believing she didn't know felt easier than accepting any other explanation. For a few fragile minutes, I convinced myself everything was still okay. Waiting alone gave memories too much space to surface. As the morning slowed between preparations, my mind drifted backward, replaying moments from the past year. At first they appeared the way they always had, warm and comforting. My sister thanking me after vendor meetings. Late-night conversations filled with laughter. The hugs, the messages, the constant reminders that she appreciated everything I had done. But something subtle changed as I watched those memories again. The gratitude began to feel rehearsed. I remembered how often appreciation came right after a problem had been solved. How relief replaced panic the moment I stepped in. How quickly conversations moved forward once I agreed to handle something difficult. Scenes that once felt emotional now revealed patterns I hadn't noticed before. I was always the solution. When deadlines approached, she called me. When decisions felt overwhelming, she waited for my opinion. When costs increased unexpectedly, she grew quiet until I offered reassurance. I had interpreted those moments as trust, as closeness between sisters. Now they looked different. It wasn't that she demanded help. She didn't have to. I filled the space automatically, anticipating needs before they were spoken. Over time, solving problems stopped being an act of kindness and became the expected outcome. I thought about how rarely she handled crises alone, how naturally responsibility shifted toward me without discussion. Even the phrase she used most often echoed differently now. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Back then, it sounded loving. Now it felt revealing. Hurt settled in first, heavy and familiar. But slowly, another emotion began replacing it. Not anger, not resentment, something clearer, something steadier, understanding. I wasn't suddenly being pushed away. The distance had been forming gradually, shaped by roles we both accepted without questioning. I had built myself into the foundation of her life so completely that stepping back now felt unnatural to everyone involved, including me. The realization didn't arrive as heartbreak. It arrived as clarity. If I stopped fixing things, the system we had quietly created would have to change. And for the first time, a new question surfaced. one that felt both frightening and strangely freeing. If I stopped helping, what would happen? I returned to my room, needing a moment of quiet away from the noise downstairs. The city stretched beyond the window, calm and indifferent to the chaos of wedding schedules and family expectations. My phone rested in my hand longer than usual before I unlocked it. Almost without thinking, I opened the payment dashboard I had used for months. The familiar interface loaded slowly, rows of transactions appearing one by one. Deposits, confirmations, adjustments, balances. Evidence of every decision made along the way. As the page refreshed, a notification banner slid across the top of the screen. An old message preview appeared. "Thank you for always saving me." It was from my sister, sent months earlier after I resolved a major venue issue. Seeing it now hit differently. The words carried warmth, but also something heavier I couldn't ignore anymore. I scrolled further. Several balances remained open. Catering overtime fees pending approval. Final staff payments awaiting authorization. The photographer's remaining balance scheduled for release that afternoon. Venue service charges still marked incomplete. Each line ended with the same requirement: authorization needed today. My breathing slowed as understanding replaced confusion. The wedding itself had been built over months. Contracts signed and plans finalized. Everything existed physically. The flowers were delivered. Guests were arriving. The ceremony was ready, but the day hadn't actually been secured yet, not completely. Final approvals still depended on the account connected to my name. Without confirmation, payments wouldn't process. Vendors wouldn't finalize services. Timelines would begin to stall quietly behind the scenes. I stared at the screen, feeling emotion and logic finally align. The wedding existed, but the day itself still depended on me. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my phone. The payment dashboard still open, numbers glowing quietly against the screen. For months, every decision had felt automatic. A problem appeared, and I solved it. A bill arrived, and I approved it. Helping had never required thought before. It was simply what I did, but this time was different. My thumb hovered over the authorization button, while my mind raced through possibilities. I could approve everything and walk downstairs smiling, pretending nothing had changed. The ceremony would run perfectly. Guests would celebrate. My sister would have her dream day, untouched by conflict. No one would ever know how close things had come to stopping. That option felt familiar. Safe. Invisible. Another thought followed quickly behind it. I could confront her publicly. Demand answers. Force acknowledgement in front of everyone who had watched me fade into the background. The idea flashed hot for a moment, fueled by hurt. But just as quickly it faded. Public scenes didn't fix broken dynamics. They only created new wounds. Then a quieter option appeared. Protect myself, not through anger, not through punishment, just through a boundary I had never allowed myself to set before. I realized something simple but powerful. Approving the payments right now would mean continuing the same pattern, silently confirming that my role was to provide without question. Saying nothing would keep everything comfortable for everyone except me. For the first time, I asked what I needed instead of what everyone else expected. My breathing steadied. The decision felt calm, almost gentle, once it formed completely. I opened the authorization settings and adjusted the approval limit, pausing automatic payments requiring confirmation. No dramatic cancellation. No messages sent. Just a quiet stop, a moment of space where my consent finally mattered. I set the phone down. It didn't feel like revenge. There was no satisfaction, no sense of winning. Only relief, mixed with uncertainty. For the first time in years, I wasn't fixing the situation immediately. I was waiting, and as silence filled the room, one question lingered heavier than the rest. What would happen now? Nothing happened at first. The hallway outside remained filled with laughter and movement. Music drifted faintly from downstairs as guests continued arriving, unaware of anything changing behind the scenes. From the outside, the wedding moved forward exactly as planned. Then small shifts began. A planner walked quickly past my door, phone pressed tightly to her ear. voice lowered but urgent. Minutes later, another staff member followed, carrying paperwork and scanning it repeatedly as if searching for an answer that refused to appear. Downstairs, payment terminals attempted transactions that quietly declined. No alarms sounded, no announcements were made. Conversations simply paused, then resumed in softer tones. Staff gathered near service tables, waiting for confirmation that didn't come. Time moved forward anyway. I watched from the balcony as coordinators checked their watches more frequently. A florist stood beside unopened boxes, unsure whether to continue setup. Catering staff whispered among themselves, glancing toward supervisors for direction. The ceremony start time crept closer. Guests chatted happily, adjusting outfits, taking photos, completely unaware that the smooth rhythm of the day had begun to slow beneath the surface. Everything still looked beautiful, organized, perfect. But underneath that calm exterior, uncertainty spread quietly, like a storm building without thunder. Every passing minute added pressure no one could ignore for long, and somewhere within that growing tension, I realized the day was finally waiting for me instead of the other way around. The clock kept moving. She found me 20 minutes later. My sister stepped into the room without knocking, still half dressed for the ceremony, makeup unfinished, emotion already visible in her eyes. Behind her confidence, panic flickered just beneath the surface. "Hey," she said carefully, closing the door. "The planner said there's an issue with some payments. They can't process the final approvals." I studied her face, searching for confusion, for genuine surprise. For a moment, I almost believed she didn't understand what was happening. "The authorization," I said quietly. Silence stretched between us. Her expression changed, not into shock, but recognition. A small exhale escaped her, as if something inevitable had finally arrived. "You did that now?" she asked. The question landed heavier than anger would have. There was no denial in her voice, no misunderstanding, only frustration that timing had shifted. "That depends," I replied softly. "Did you know everything was still under my name?" She hesitated just long enough to answer without words. "I thought it was easier this way," she admitted finally. "You're better at handling these things. And you said you wanted to help." The room felt smaller suddenly. "You moved me to a guest table," I said. "Vendors call me the sponsor. Everyone talks about payments like, that's my only role." She looked away, guilt flickering briefly before defensiveness replaced it. "It wasn't personal. Weddings are complicated. Mom and his family thought it would be simpler if responsibilities were clearer." Simpler. The word settled heavily between us. In that moment, clarity replaced the last pieces of hope I had been holding on to. She hadn't been unaware. She had known all along, the changes, the distance, the quiet reassignment of my place in her life. None of it had been accidental. Emotion rose, but my voice stayed calm. "You needed me to pay," I said slowly, meeting her eyes. "Not to belong." The words broke something fragile between us. Her expression collapsed, tears forming as realization finally reached her too. But the truth had already been spoken, and once said, it couldn't be taken back. For the first time, we were standing in the same reality. And nothing about our relationship looked the same anymore. After she left the room, silence settled around me in a way that felt unfamiliar but strangely steady. The sounds of the wedding continued somewhere beyond the walls, distant laughter mixing with footsteps and music preparing to begin. Life was moving forward, whether I participated in it or not. I sat by the window and let the truth fully arrive. For hours, I had believed this moment was about rejection, about being pushed aside on the most important day of my sister's life. But as I replayed everything from the past few years, a different understanding began to form. This hadn't happened overnight. I wasn't suddenly replaced today. I had been slowly reduced, piece by piece, long before the wedding morning. Every time I solved the crisis without question. Every time I ignored my own needs to keep peace. Every time I accepted gratitude instead of equality, the balance shifted a little more. No one forced me into that role completely. I had stepped into it willingly, believing love meant giving endlessly. Somewhere along the way, I confused being needed with being valued. The boundary I set today wasn't punishment. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. For the first time, I allowed myself to exist outside the role of fixer, provider, and protector. And in that space, something unexpected appeared. Calm. Not the fragile calm that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that grows when you finally stop abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. My identity no longer depended on how useful I was to someone else. I wasn't losing my place in the family. I was reclaiming my place within myself. My mother found me shortly after, her expression tight with concern and urgency. She closed the door behind her and lowered her voice, though tension filled every word. "What's going on?" she asked. "People are waiting. The planner says payments are delayed." I explained calmly, choosing honesty over defense. Her reaction came instantly, shaped more by fear than anger. "Beta, ladtaya kahinji?" she said, shaking her head. "This is your sister's wedding. Families don't do this to each other. Just fix it and we'll talk later." The sentence felt painfully familiar. For years, peace had always meant silence. Approval had always required sacrifice. I took a slow breath before answering. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I said gently. "I just stopped paying for approval." She stared at me, surprised not by the words themselves, but by how calmly they were spoken. There was no accusation in my voice, no rebellion, only certainty. For the first time, I wasn't negotiating my worth through compliance. The conversation didn't end with agreement. It ended with understanding that something fundamental had changed. The dynamic we had lived inside for years no longer worked the same way. And even though discomfort lingered in the room, a quiet cycle finally broke. A few weeks later, life felt almost unrecognizable in its simplicity. I sat alone at a small neighborhood cafe on a quiet afternoon, sunlight warming the table beside my coffee. Outside, people moved through ordinary routines, conversations blending into soft background noise. There were no timelines to manage, no urgent calls, no responsibilities waiting for me to solve them. For the first time in years, my phone stayed silent. The wedding had come and gone. Conversations afterward were careful, sometimes awkward, still finding new balance. Some relationships felt different now, less automatic, more honest. And surprisingly, I didn't feel bitterness about it. What I felt instead was space. I began noticing small things again. Morning walks without rushing. Evenings that belonged only to me. Decisions made without guilt attached to them. Peace didn't arrive dramatically. It settled slowly, like a quiet rhythm replacing constant urgency. One afternoon, while watching steam rise from my coffee, a realization surfaced that stayed with me long after. Happiness had always felt loud in my life, tied to achievements, celebrations, and making others proud. But peace was different. Peace was quieter, steadier, and somehow stronger. Peace didn't require me to prove anything. It simply allowed me to exist. I understood then that belonging should never come at the cost of self-erasure. Love isn't measured by how much of yourself you're willing to lose. The right relationships don't need constant sacrifice to survive. If you've ever found yourself giving so much that you disappeared in the process, you're not alone. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't holding everything together. Sometimes it's choosing yourself for the first time. If this story resonated with you, share your experience in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that explore real emotions and real turning points like this one, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. There's always another story waiting to be told.